The Mask, Big Head, is an American comic book series created by Doug Mahnke and John Arcudi and published by Dark Horse Comics, Mayhem No. 1, 1989. The Stories of the Mask tells the story of a supernatural mask that grants its wearers nearly limitless power, affects the wearer's personality by removing all social and moral inhibitions, characterized by a large set of teeth and a green head, often at the cost of their sanity. The character was inspired by a combination of villains from DC Comics, Marvel Comics, and horror movies such as The Joker, The Green Goblin, Freddy Krueger, Drive, Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and Steve Ditko's The Creeper. In the original comics, Stanley Ipkiss wears the mask and becomes a villain. Stanley Ipkiss is depicted as polite, meek and nebbish, but becomes a brash, confident, thieving, charismatic, dashing and still polite supervillain who later on becomes a superhero while wearing the mask. Whereas Dorian Tyrell, the main villain, shows no change in personality whatsoever while wearing the mask. The same is true in the sequel Son of the Mask, whose main character Tim Avery is named after Tex Avery. In an antique shop, a weak, neurotic man named Stanley Ipkiss shops for a gift to give to his girlfriend, Kathy. At the store he purchases an old jade mask which begins to speak to him. When Stanley wears it, he is transformed into a wacky super-powered being with an abnormally large, bald, green-skinned head and a mouthful of large teeth. After exploring his new abilities, Ipkiss goes on a rampage, taking revenge on those with whom he has a grudge, and earns the nickname Big Head. After taking the mask off, Stan begins to realize what has been happening. His acts as Big Head begin to take an emotional toll on him. He becomes verbally abusive toward Kathy. She kicks him out, but keeps the mask since it was a gift from Stanley. Later, Stan breaks into Kathy's apartment to steal it back just as the police arrive in response to an earlier housebreaking call. Deciding his only way out is as Big Head, Stan puts the mask back on and kills multiple cops during his escape in addition to causing a great deal of property damage. He returns home as Big Head and removes the mask, preparing to leave the city, only to be shot in the back and killed by Kathy now wearing the mask, who figured out the identity of Big Head and donned the mask while Stan's back was turned after he took it off. Kathy takes the mask to Lieutenant Kellaway for safekeeping. Kellaway, who had been struggling with both the recent Big Head murders and organized crime lords on the loose in his city, tries on the mask. Becoming Big Head, Kellaway sets out to take down the crime lords who have plagued his police career. Despite Kellaway's good intentions, the mask causes his methods to become increasingly more violent. Big Head encounters Walter, a behemoth-sized mob muscle man who never speaks, who has undertaken a vendetta against Big Head for killing his employers. Walter never shows pain and is the only one who can injure Big Head to any real degree. We need your support by subscribing and liking and sharing the video to continue producing your favorite content. While fighting off Walter's attacks, Lieutenant Kellaway, as Big Head, becomes the target of a police manhunt. When Kellaway's partner attempts to stop Big Head, the mask-altered policeman nearly kills his friend and colleague. He removes the mask, buries it in his basement in cement, and vows never to let it be worn again. The crime lords send men to Lieutenant Kellaway's home and attempt to kill him. Kellaway makes his way to the basement in an attempt to retrieve the mask. But he is wounded before he can put it on and ends up in a coma. The men escape, taking the mask with them. One of them puts it on the wimpy driver, Nunzio, as a joke, but he becomes Big Head and kills the thugs and all of the crime lords, thus becoming the city's preeminent crime boss. Kathy knows that it is up to her to stop him, dresses as a hooker, and Big Head falls head over heels for her. She tricks him into taking off the mask, pulls out a gun, and as Nunzio dives for the mask she shoots and kills him. Kathy uses the mask to escape and decides to go after the real crime boss, Don Mazzo. After Kathy destroys the remaining mobsters, she comes across and gets into a fight with the only man left, Walter. However, Kathy decides to throw caution to the wind and surrenders after deciding neither one of them are going to die and tosses it to Walter, but he seems to have no interest in it. Kellaway, recovered from the hospital, drives his car into Walter, sending him and the mask into the docks. Four friends, named Rick, a disgruntled anarchist, Ben, a failed musician, Hugo, a recovering drug addict, and Archie, a teenage savant, feel that their lives are at a dead end, until Rick, fascinated by the Big Head murders, finds the magical mask by the city pier and brings it home. Each of the four take turns trying it on, and attempt to use its power to fix their lives but end up making things worse for themselves. Walter, having recovered since being plowed into by Kellaway, finds the mask in his hands and is unable to use it and, in frustration, throws it off into the distance with tremendous force. Ray Tuttle, a loser film buff with a grudge against an entrepreneur who escaped responsibility after a faulty theme park ride the latter owned caused the death of his wife, leaving his daughter, Emily, mute. Tuttle discovers the mask's power, but Lieutenant Kellaway and a group of terrorists take it from him. In New Orleans, the mask ends up in the hands of Eric Martin, who tries to find his sister, who has been kidnapped by voodoo gangsters. Toy designer named Aldo Krasker gets his hands on the mask, which leads him to subconsciously embark on a murder spree against high school colleagues who had ridiculed his acting skills. The mask had been buried in concrete for 2 decades, during which Kellaway retired in California and Kathy became mayor of Edge City. Struggling politician Abner Meade finds it, and as Big Head uses his uninhibited and at times violent outbursts to make himself endearing to the populace and run for president of the United States. After Kathy visits Ipkiss' grave, he returns from the dead as a zombie Big Head, with a thirst for revenge. Walking around the city, he finds and kills Kellaway, Walter, Don Mazzo, Lionel, many police officers, and a biker. When he finally finds Kathy, she yells at him, telling him that he does not have the mask anymore and he could not have come back to life as Big Head. After that, he becomes a pile of dust and all the individuals he murdered are brought back to life. Grifter, of the WildC.A.T, is sent to Las Vegas to break up a weapons smuggling ring at a gun show. Trouble ensues when one of the tourists ends up with the mask, and Big Head causes a riot at the gun show by pulling a knife. Grifter initially mistakes the mask for a target, but when the tourist's girlfriend is threatened, Grifter and the mask team up to stop the smuggling ring. We need your support by subscribing and liking and sharing the video to continue producing your favorite content. The alien bounty hunter Lobo is hired to find the ultimate Bastic, a being who has decimated numerous planets. Lobo's hunt leads him to Earth. Lobo eventually wins the mask for himself from a petty thief, puts it on, and causes even more damage. A black hole sends him back in time by a month and it turns out that he is, in fact, the ultimate Bastic, and tosses the mask back to the same spot where the thief found it. Lobo breaks the time loop when he meets his past self and turns his past self in for the reward money. The mask is applied to a superhuman serial killer as part of a secret government experiment which inevitably goes disastrously wrong. Martial law is called in to take down a nemesis who is not only immune to his usual ultra-violence, but can warp reality according to his psychotic whims. A depressed airplane pilot, smoking in a cargo area, finds the mask and goes insane. He flies and crashes an aircraft into a mountain, killing the rest of his crew. He survives and, after removing the mask, becomes a resident of a mental institution. Later at the crash site, a little girl living on a nearby farm finds the mask and races home to show her abusive drunken father. That night the girl wears the mask and murders her father. She then calls the police to report a green-faced lunatic. Afterwards the girl is sent to a foster home with kindly foster parents. She goes to a church for confession and the priest takes the mask for safekeeping. A short time later he dons the mask and becomes a sex-crazed maniac with the nuns. After the church's unsuccessful attempt at exorcism, the priest sadly removes the mask and claims that the mask forced him to do unspeakable things. The church hires a professor to trace the mask's origins and he discovers it is 1,000 years old, made using African techniques, but decorated with Scandinavian motifs. After analyzing the mask, the professor cannot give the church an explanation for it, so they decide to destroy it. But the professor finds a museum which is willing to donate a small fortune to acquire the mask. On hill roads at night, Professor of Anthropology tells young museum collector the history about the mask and its victims. The young museum collector does not really believe the professor's story and puts the mask back in a box as they head for the city, presumably Gotham City. The Joker inadvertently gets his hands on the magical mask after it is found in a Gotham City museum. With its power, the Joker begins to feel it is time to rejuvenate his career as a criminal. Lieutenant Kellaway finds his way to Gotham and helps Batman and Commissioner Gordon to defeat the newly superpowered Joker, Batman determining that the mask is not having its usual psychological effect on the wearer as the Joker always expressed his innermost desires, with the mask merely making him unstoppable. Batman is able to trick the Joker into removing the mask by claiming that the villain is no longer funny, and is relying on tired shtick and the power of the mask instead of using his own style, prompting the Joker's original head to emerge from his shoulder. Lieutenant Kellaway asks Batman to give him the mask. Batman agrees and the mask is last seen as Kellaway digs up Stanley Ipkiss's grave and buries the mask there with his corpse. A film of The Mask was released in the United States on July 29, 1994, starring Jim Carrey in the title role. Directed by Chuck Russell, the film co-starred Peter Green as Dorian Tyrell, Peter Riegert as Lt. Midge Kellaway, Orestes Madisena as Nico, Richard Jenny as Charlie Schumacher, Amy Yazbek as Peggy Brandt, and Cameron Diaz, in her screen debut, as Tina Carlisle. Ben Stein has a cameo role as Dr. Arthur Newman. Director Chuck Russell, who helmed the original film, expressed his interest in a sequel. The plot instead focuses on another man, played by Jamie Kennedy, who finds the mask and unintentionally conceives a child while wearing it. The result is a son who possesses the powers of the mask without needing to wear it. At the same time, Loki, played by Alan Cumming, the Norse god and original creator of the mask, searches the human world attempting to find it, and Dr. Arthur Newman is involved to re-establish the relationship between the mask and its creator Loki. We need your support by subscribing and liking and sharing the video to continue producing your favorite content.